You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Well, at last, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson should become the first African-American woman sitting on the Supreme Court bench. Hallelujah. This after so many insults and innuendos, such bad manners on the part of Republicans on the committee, such snide and degrading comments, except that they didn't degrade her because she had her eyes on the prize. Congratulations from all our hearts, Justice Jackson. As for the rest of today's program, now that expectably tragic news has come about the torture rapes in Ukraine, along with other atrocities, the bombings and murders and strafing in the streets, I find myself going back to basics. When Judge Navanathan Pillay was the premier jurist of the International Rwanda Court on Genocide, she and Jessica Neuwirth crafted a decision which was read into international law. It specified that rape in war was a crime against humanity. This was a titanic accomplishment for it to be encoded in law. Yet sometime later, since they were both friends, I asked them each, with a certain wry bitterness, if rape in war is a crime against humanity, then what is it in peacetime? We're going to find out what actually will happen to these refugees streaming out of Ukraine, 98% of them women with small children who are walking, breathing prey for predatory traffickers. And my special guest today is going to help us find out. But before we do any of that, we have to go inside the headlines. In war and in peace, rape, an act of profound violation and sexual violence, is an unspeakably horrendous crime against women. The refugee women are prey for sexual harassment, for fake sympathy schemes, for all forms of jostling and molestation, and, of course, rape itself, and even kidnapping. And yes, they are prey for predatory traffickers. The commercialization of rape. Both the Red Cross and the United Nations have recognized this and, open quote, expressed concern, close quote. For those of us who work in the global women's movement, those issues are cause for much more than concern. So today's program is going to be given over to this issue entirely in a longer than usual conversation with my guest, Taina Bien-Aimé, an expert on all aspects of this issue. Her exploration and a summary of trafficking, both in macrocosm and microcosm, is staggering. Her explanations of the points of difference and the manipulative malfeasance of the sex industry regarding these issues is well beyond my knowledge. So there's no need, really, for me to go inside any headlines because she's going to take us there. So this week we're going to go straight to the conversation because it's so clear and explanatory. Look, murder in war is epidemic and expected. But this extra frisson of horror, sexual violence, dates way back. It's in the Iliad and the Bible and the Ramayana. It's as old as patriarchy itself. The words promised to every foot soldier as well as to every general: rape and take spoil. Chillingly, this persists even after refugees have fled to neighboring countries across Europe. Indeed, it awaits them, as you'll hear during this exclusive conversation. Then, in fighting words later on in the program, I will try to address the ways in which all these abuses are linked by the chain entwining women's bodies. We have to take a short break here, but I'll be back in just a moment with my special guest, Taina Bien-Aimé, who is the executive director of CATW, which stands for the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. She was once simply a colleague, but a respected and admired one, and since then she's become a real friend, and her courage is infectious and important, and so is her revelation about just what is going to happen to those refugees from Ukraine. That's coming right up. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My special guest for the conversation today is Taina Bien-Aimé, who has close to 3 decades of experience defending the rights of women and girls at both the national and the global level. She currently is the executive director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, one of the oldest international organizations dedicated to ending trafficking in women and girls and ending commercial sexual exploitation as practices of gender-based violence. Prior to this position, for 20 years, she was involved with Equality Now, an international human rights organization working to promote the human rights of women and girls, first as a founding board member and subsequently as its executive director for 10 years. She was also Director of Business Affairs and Film Acquisitions at Home Box Office and practiced international corporate law at the Wall Street law firm Cleary Gottlieb Steen and Hamilton. She holds a Juris Doctor from the NYU School of Law and a degree in political science from the University of Geneva Graduate School of International Studies in Switzerland. She has received numerous awards for her work and her campaigns to uphold the human rights of women and girls, and she is on the 2021 Forbes first list of 50 over 50 women who have made a social impact. She's also my friend and my colleague in the struggle. It is with great pleasure I welcome back to the program Taina Bien-Aimé. Taina, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live. Good to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin, again.
Oh, no, it's very important. I mean, this is a central issue of feminism, and I, in my eternal naivete, can't understand why it's hard for most people to grasp, but I do know that there are well-intentioned people who haven't thought anything through and sort of go through into a knee-jerk reflex of, oh, prostitution, sex work. Well, must be called sex work, I guess, because it dignifies the woman herself, and we want to show respect for them. Okay, well, let's just and they completely overlook the vast and pernicious sex industry, this multinational corporation behind it all. So one thing I'd really be grateful if you would do is bring us up to speed on the basic issues right now. And then we can go from there, because we have a new issue on trafficking, which is prostitution, but movable, in terms of the refugees coming out of Ukraine. And that's a whole additional horror. So take it away.
Well, thanks again for having me, and just listening to you. You know, this is a 5,000-year battle. I mean, the conversations that we're having around prostitution now are the same conversations we had 50 years ago, 100 years ago, on domestic violence, on sexual violence, rape, female genital mutilation.
Right.
The list goes on. It's
I know.
called patriarchy. And patriarchy has this magical ability to reinvent itself, to recreate narratives that make us forget what violence and discrimination against women and girls is and how it manifests itself. So, I always say prostitution and incest are kind of the last frontiers in helping us understand that these are crimes of abuse of power and abuse of vulnerability for the profit of not only exploiters, but also the profit of the state.
Yep.
So, going back to the terminology of quote unquote sex work, it was coined by the sex trade itself in the late 70s, early 80s. And I have to say, really a brilliant stroke of genius, because we all as human beings need sex, want to enjoy sex. We use it as for procreative measures, and work is something that we all need to survive, and in which we want a dignified life. We want professional and emotional development through work when we're lucky. And you put them together and people are just like, oh, it's not so bad.
Right. Very
but
clever.
In fact, extremely clever. And then we're trying to catch up, saying, no, it's not sex, it's not work, it's exploitation. And by the time we finish using our ION word, people are gone.
Yeah.
And then the culture overtakes us. And it's really, really hard to get people to take a step back and look at exactly who are the actors and what are the elements that contribute to this global multi-billion-dollar sex trade. So the question is not whether or not she's 18, whether or not she was trafficked, whether or not she enjoys it. But I always say, if a Martian came down and knew nothing about the sex trade, and we gave him a little snapshot, or a snapshot of what the sex trade looks like. And on the one hand, on one side of the equation, you've got 99%, we're talking globally, of women and girls, and then the rest being boys and, trans women and gender nonconforming people on one side being bought and sold. And then on the other side, you have 99.9% of men who are the sex buyers. And you just think, well, what's wrong with this picture? So, but then from a legal perspective too, people are very confused, because there are basically three major legal frameworks that govern prostitution. You have full criminalization, which is every state in the United States, except for a few rural counties in Nevada, where prostitution is legal only in registered brothels. Then there is legalization or decriminalization, and the difference between the two frameworks are too minimal to really make a meaningful distinction between them. And that would be the Netherlands, Germany, New Zealand, Belgium, and variations thereof across Europe and Africa and Latin America. And then there is what was known in 1999 as the Swedish model, which, give it to the Swedes. They recognized that prostitution was just another form of gender-based violence and discrimination, that it was a barrier to gender equality and to sex equality. Right. And therefore, it was important to look at the people who were being bought, offer them services, and not criminalize them. But because, the sex trade is a market like any other market, where you have the simple economic equations of supply, demand, and the incentive for profit. Yeah. So if the state gives the green light to the demand, the sex buyers, then what the state says is sex trade, pimps, traffickers, brothel owners, escort services, sex tourists, the floor is yours. Yeah. And so what happens in countries where women and girls do have economic or educational opportunities, they're not going to enter the sex trade. So how do you meet that demand? You, quote unquote, import these women and girls. And that is how sex trafficking happens. So in every country that has legalized or decriminalized the sex trade has seen an exponential increase in sex trafficking. And if you look at the German brothels, you have up to 90 to 95%, the government doesn't even know, but those are their estimates of undocumented foreign women, more often than not, do not even speak the language, don't even know where they are,
Right.
and they're all deemed sex trafficked.
Right. So there really is no difference between prostitution and sex trafficking. I mean, it is part and parcel of the same industry.
Well, they are linked. So we're not saying that everyone in the sex trade was sex trafficked, although if you just scratch at the surface of these people's lives, you realize that a lot of them suffered from incest or other forms of childhood sexual abuse. They were displaced, homeless, foster care system, sex trafficked as children. And so once you reach the age of 18, that legal status of being a sex trafficked child doesn't disappear.
Right,
That is the case. You don't become all of a sudden, you don't graduate into becoming a consenting adult in the sex trade.
No, of course not.
So, yes. So the difference between a 17-year-old sex trafficked child and an 18-year-old is 60 seconds. So it's totally artificial. And sex buyers don't care. They don't care how you identify yourself. They don't care whether you're trafficked or not. They don't care. They want them young. They want them malleable. They are purchasing power. They are purchasing a commodified human being to satisfy whatever sexual fantasies he has.
Right. Right. Well, we saw this most recently in the Epstein case and so many others, just so many others. It boggles my mind how there can still be sensible debate over this. I mean, anyway, but now what we have is a whole spewing out of hapless refugees from Ukraine, unusually, in this case, blonde and blue-eyed, as opposed to all of the dark-skinned people who have been refugees to Europe in the past 6 years. I think it's 6 million of them, who were not welcomed with the same opening arms. But nonetheless, these refugees, too, deserve all the succor that can be given them, except that many of them, because they are 98% women and girls, women and children, are prey to traffickers. So what is happening on this front now?
So we know that displacement for any reason, whether it's environmental disasters or conflict or war, are signs of acute vulnerabilities to trafficking, including sex trafficking. We see that around the world. And so what we're seeing now with the war in Ukraine is, as you mentioned, we're hearing reports on a daily basis of massive rapes of women and girls, and with their forced migration, we are seeing, let's say, Germany or they, Europe is very porous, right? And Germany having a legalized system is actually welcoming Ukrainian women and girls for brothels. Now we have to. Yes, I have seen active advertisements from brothels saying, "Just come and you'll be safe here."
Oh my God!
So we have to also recognize that the sex trade is an extremely racist industry, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
It's segregated by race, it's segregated by age, by size, by pregnancy status.
Right.
These are essential marketing tools for brothels or online exploitation. And so we have seen, we work very closely with direct service providers, including Sanctuary for Families. Ukrainian women and Russian women have usually been highly coveted in what is known as sort of high-end prostitution, like escort services or the hustlers on the West Side Highway, because precisely they are
blonde and blue-eyed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yes, the sex trade is highly segregated by race. And so because we live in highly racist systems around the world, the Ukrainian women and girls and young women are particularly coveted in commercial sex establishments. And so the traffickers are taking advantage of these vulnerabilities. And we haven't even begun to, to get all the reports of the horrors that are happening on the ground.
Is there, given the United Nations waffly hand-wringing position on this issue, to say the least, is there any mechanism through the UN that can be a warning to these women as they move out into Europe? I mean, can be an alert system, can be an alternate. I don't know what it is I'm reaching for, but I'm reaching for something. Does it all deflect back on NGOs, poor as we are and rare as we are?
That I think that unfortunately that is the case, and this brings me to donor direct action, which is I should say a project of Sisterhood is Global Institute. You know, the unbelievable think tank that you founded, Robin, with Simone de Beauvoir in 1984. So donor direct action, what it is a regranting group that promotes women's equality through giving small grants to frontline women's groups around the world. And so donor direct action
takes no cut. Takes no cut.
They support 16 partner organizations in 14 countries. We have the Guest Taina Equality Fund to End Sex Trafficking, with 12 grantees, including in the region, so from Latvia and elsewhere in Europe, who are working around the clock to welcome these women, to try to be a go-between between the government and these women for exactly what you were talking about, for alert systems, and to provide them shelter without having to get raped for it.
Right.
But it's very, and at the UN level, there's the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, which is the guardian of the Palermo Protocol, which is the UN Trafficking Protocol, and they're on the ground and they're working, as well as I'm assuming IOM, the International Organization for Migration. So. Yes, but as you know, women and girls are usually an afterthought. I always say they're the chapter 13 of a 13-chapter book.
Yep.
And so it's very, very difficult because it's almost, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's almost accepted that these are the spoils of war. This is what happens during
I was thinking
war.
that. I was thinking just that the other day. I was thinking there is a kind of, nobody will say it, of course, directly. I mean, you don't catch Anthony Blinken saying it. But there's a kind of normalization of, oh yeah, the refugees are 92%, 98% women and children. Oh yeah, there's a whole gender breakdown of who must stay. Even if women want to stay and fight, there's a kind of people blink and move on. And I know that extreme situations revert back to standard solutions, so sexism and racism rear their heads in war. But it's astonishing. It's just astonishing to me. I mean, there are people who are running for Congress, who are running on platforms of elect hoes, H-O''S, as in whores. It takes my breath away. I don't, at my basic naive self, after all these years of feminism, I don't understand. I mean, I do understand, of course, intellectually, because it makes money. It's a huge industry. It's an industry that's tied in with pornography. It's an industry that's tied in with surrogacy. You use the female body in every possible way you can. So I understand it intellectually, but emotionally, I don't know how some women, and many, 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 many men can do this to our own species. You're right. If somebody landed from Mars, they would be aghast. No. And I must say,
Well, you know,
no, I must say, Taina, that, you are one of the very few people, fortunately not that few, but one of the people who have lived with this knowledge and the specifics of it and the legalities of it and retained and updated your expertise day after year after millennia, without despairing. Although, as somebody who is your friend, I know that you do have those moments of despair, as we all do. But I mean, but knowing that the long run, we've got to win this. I mean, but the courage that requires daily is extraordinary, and I thank you for it. I really do.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Robin. And I follow you always. Some days I have to say I ask the goddesses, please don't make me care. But
right.
what gives
yeah
what gives me hope is that first of all, it's a 5,000-year struggle, as we know, right? Patriarchy is the base on which we all stand. We try to move the furniture left and right, but it's just a bear to dismantle. But we have to also remember, like during the suffrage years, right? If we had depended on women to get the right to vote, we still wouldn't get
that
right? So it was a very tiny group of women. Now, I'm not proposing that people throw themselves in front of horses or get force-fed in prison, not at all. But I think we have to remember that. And look at female genital mutilation. I mean, you were working at Ms. Magazine. You were one of the first ones to talk about this 5,000-year-old cultural practice.
And now it's just it. Here's the thing, you see, only the failures feel real, as you and I both know, because the successes immediately get, that we got that, and we move on. So now I remember the very first UN conference when to mention things like unpaid labor of women, or to mention FGM, was just to make people up the wall with cultural relativism, with this, with that, with the other thing. And now it's just accepted. It sort of happened overnight. I don't know. I missed it. I must have been in the shower when we succeeded. They snuck it in. But it will happen this way. It's just that the waiting for that. I mean, and every defeat feels real. I know that Belgium recently legitimized, I don't know what other word to use, but amended the prostitution laws to permit, loosening brothel regulations. So every time that happens, there's a feeling of back to square one, which is never completely true, of course, because it's always a step and a half forward. But my God, it is extraordinary, and it's so basic. Tell me what principled listeners to this podcast can or should be doing to be of help in this current crisis situation, but also more in the long term in terms of trafficking and prostitution and the buying and selling of female human beings.
Well, first I would say don't lose hope, and I think we all are actors of our own culture, in our own culture, and the sex trade is our harmful cultural practice. I mean, it's everywhere. The media, as you know, the horrific John Oliver segment last month calling to decriminalize pimping is just another example of how much the culture is pushing for the commodification and exploitation of women and girls, and then calling it fun or
it broke my heart.
Empowerment.
It just broke my heart. I just
exactly.
I expect so much better from him. But then again, he was tutored by somebody from the sex industry. So one has to ask, why was that his choice? So anyway, go on.
But then I would say at the global level, go on the Donor Direct Action website. It's donordirectaction.org. If you can contribute, please contribute. If any of the listeners are New Yorkers, we hope that New York will be the first state of the country to enact the equality model, the Nordic model. It's called the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act. and you can get more information about that on equalitymodelny.org. And contact there's so many anti-trafficking groups right now. I think what distinguishes CATW is that we're the only ones who or the first ones who looked at trafficking as gender-based violence and discrimination.
You are.
But I think there are many ways. I would say awareness raising, breaking the silence, listening to survivors, that you can do anywhere you are. We have the internet, which is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
It has exponentially made our work harder, but it also has connected us tremendously. And so there's plenty to do, but we can't despair. And when we first started this 30 years ago, being part of this movement, there were very few sex trade survivors, right? There was Vanita Carter, there was Norma Hotaling, Rest Her Soul. But now there is a growing global movement of sex trade survivors who are fierce and brilliant and strategic and really take no prisoners. Unfortunately, our media has become a mouthpiece for the sex trade, so it's very difficult to get their voices across, but they will come to the forefront of our sort of our cultural and socioeconomic understanding of what the sex trade actually does, not just to the victims and exploited people in it, but also to our society as a whole. There is no way that a man who goes to a strip club on a Friday night or who purchases a woman for sexual acts on a Saturday night will go on Monday morning in that conference room or next to that water cooler and think that the woman next to him is an equal human being. No way. Your brain doesn't work that way.
That's right. Oh, Taina, thank you for everything you do and just for getting up in the morning and doing it again. I mean, it is an amazement. And with a particular sensitivity to what happens to women of color who take the main brunt of this ghastly oppression, but also keep on keeping on. It's just you give me hope and succor to continue, because it's a long struggle, and we don't often realize just how long it is. It's very convenient for people to say, sex worker, sex this, sex that, and just not think. So perhaps if nothing happens out of this broadcast, except that some people go away, I think most of our listeners probably are already on board, but that's my assumption. If there are people who aren't, at least go away and think this through and do some of the reading and contact Coalition Against Trafficking in Women and the various groups that Taina mentioned, and become involved, because as long as this exists, we call ourselves abolitionists because we are. And as long as this exists, no woman anywhere can walk down any street or path or village road with safety and confidence. Her humanity is at stake. I'm so grateful to you for coming back on the program, Taina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for all you do every day.
We have to take another short pause here, but then I'll return with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
At home and abroad, sexual violence against women are dehumanizing, fighting words. Republican-led Oklahoma State House has passed a near total ban on abortion, except in cases where the pregnant woman's life is endangered. Under the bill, anyone who performs an abortion would face up to 10 years in prison and up to $100,000 in fines. The bill, first passed by the Oklahoma Senate last year, was suddenly revived last week without explanation from Republican lawmakers and will now head to the governor, Republican Kevin Stitt, who has committed to signing any anti-abortion legislation that comes across his desk. The ban will go into effect 90 days after the state legislature adjourns at the end of May, unless courts intervene. Meanwhile, in the Republic of Ukraine, rape tortures and rape murders are now almost common. Worse, if it's imaginable to think of worse, those survivors who manage to be refugees fleeing the country are met at the borders not only with welcoming arms by principled neighboring citizens of other countries, but tragically with welcoming arms by, yes, traffickers. After all, these particular refugees are in high demand, being blonde and blue-eyed and commodifiable in the legal or semi-legal brothels of much of Europe. As Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska told the French newspaper Le Parisien in a recent interview, quote, "There are 2 million more women than men in Ukraine. These days, this statistic takes on its full meaning. Our resistance, like our future victory, also has a particularly female face. Women are fighting in the army and signed up to territorial defense. They are the foundation of a powerful volunteer movement to supply, deliver, and feed. Others are simply doing their jobs in hospitals, pharmacies, shops, transport, public services, so that life continues." Period. Close quote. These women are not, I repeat not, primed for serving customers in German brothels. Meanwhile, too, back in New York State, the new surrogacy law has come into effect, ending a ban on commercial surrogacy in the state. As former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who fell from grace because of his own sexual peccadillos, as he unctuously stated, open quote, "For far too long, LGBTQ New Yorkers and other New Yorkers struggling with fertility were denied the opportunity to start a family because of arbitrary, archaic laws. With this law now in effect, no longer will anyone be blocked from the joys of starting a family and raising children simply because of who they are. Period." Close quote. Thank you, Andrew. Except the women being commodified, of course. Commercial surrogacy was previously illegal in New York State, while non-paid, so-called altruistic surrogacy agreements were deemed unenforceable and thus not legally binding. The first bill seeking to repeal the ban was introduced in 2012, but was virulently opposed by feminists who argued that paid surrogacy led to the exploitation of women. Duh! We lost that one. For now. But these issues are all related. As my guest, Taina Bien-Aimé, has written, quote, "Commercial reproductive surrogacy and the sex trade are stitched with the same noxious thread. A quilt with women's bodies, especially black and brown bodies, are sewn into history for the profit of others, disdaining the idea that women are human." Close quote. I'd add that pornography is also a part of that quilt, in that it literally educates boys and men as to what is expected of them and their so-called manhood. To engage any one of these issues is to dare open one's mind to the possibility, in fact the reality, of all of them as linked. These are not jobs. No 7 or 8-year-old little girl dreams of growing up to become a prostituted woman, or for that matter a pornographic image, or someone's tool or toy or victim or reproductive machine. Not forced to give birth or forced not to give birth. That these functions are filled by female human beings desperate to survive is no excuse for their inhumanity, when society should instead be providing education and employment with dignity and substance. We are each of us responsible. Every academic course, formerly called Women's Studies or Feminist Studies, which now labels itself obediently as Women and Gender and Sexuality Studies, violates the crucial separation of these issues. The point of feminism was to separate them. Every time we use the term sex worker as if that were a viable means of employment that had dignity and freedom, as opposed to a term being deliberately coined by the sex industry to control its forced inhabitants, we collaborate. It is past time, millennia past time, for us to grasp the fact that the biological realities of women are one aspect of our humanity, not the sole aspect. Women may die gratuitously and unnecessarily from the draconian Oklahoma law against abortion. Women will die gratuitously and unnecessarily from the alluring approaches of German brothels. Whether forced, commercialized, confined, seduced, denied, or manipulated, women's bodies are not the terrain on which this must be fought. There is simply no reason for this, and it must stop. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. We'll be on hiatus next week, but then right back here. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.